Okay, got it. Okay, well, it's 1:30. I know we're just letting people in. I have a long speech here that I'm going to get over with so that we can get on with our speaker today. Welcome, everyone. Today, we gather virtually together from many different places, and it is a gift for us to be together in this way. Here I am at Dalnavert Museum. My name is Charlene Van Buchenhout, and I'm the Programming and Marketing Coordinator here at the museum. And the museum is on, I've adapted my speech all of a sudden, so I've muddled myself, but the museum was built on Treaty 1 and territory and was signed, this is a recording and I'm making all these mistakes. I'll start again. This land that we are on, that I am on today at Dalnavert Museum, and that most of us are gathering virtually on, is called Winnipeg. And Winnipeg is located on Treaty 1 territory. Treaty 1 was signed only 24 years before Dalnavert was built in 1895. And this area of Turtle Island is the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dene, and Dakota peoples, and is the homeland of a nation that I am proud to be a member of, the homeland of the Métis Nation. This is the 8th installment of the Elizabeth Alloway Lecture Series. The Dalnavert Museum is honored to host this series in collaboration with the Winnipeg Foundation Centennial Institute and in celebration of Elizabeth Alloway, and to shine a spotlight on the shared Elizabeth Alloway History Scholarship Fund and the Heritage Friends of Dalnavert Museum Fund, which you can donate to on the Winnipeg Foundation website, which I encourage you all to do because this is a $7,500 annual award which will support a second-year master's student in researching how women have shaped the history of Canada and understanding the roles of women in Canadian history. It's very important. This is a joint fund with Dalnavert, so supporting the scholarship fund will also benefit the museum. Now is a great time to give right before the end of the year. This fund is named for Elizabeth Alloway, who, along with her husband, William, were instrumental in starting and establishing the Winnipeg Foundation in 1921. When Elizabeth died in 1926, she left her entire estate to the foundation, which was over $800,000, which in its time was the greatest financial gift that had been given at that point. She was deeply interested and committed to charitable work, especially when it came to the welfare of children and women. And she was also interested in the career of nursing. She didn't do any nursing, but she promoted and she did philanthropy work for nurses. She had a wide range of interests and many friends whom she hosted at her house just down the street from Dalnavert. And speaking of Dalnavert, we have today for our speaker one of the original friends of Dalnavert, Dr. Warne, who is a volunteer and a longtime supporter of the museum. And recently, back in June, had given a talk and demonstration on corsets with Dr. Sabrina Mark. She is a public speaker and a regular book reviewer for the Winnipeg Free Press. And I want to welcome Vanessa Warne with us today to speak about sketching with scissors and silhouette portraiture. Welcome, Vanessa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlene. I'll just quickly flip things over and share my screen now. Here we go. And then I will give a proper hello. There, everyone can hopefully see my screen now. And can you hear me okay, Charlene? If you give me a thumbs up, I'll know we're good to go. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa. And as some of you know, and as Charlene just referenced, I've been exploring and learning from the amazing collection at Dalnavert Museum for more than a decade now. And I'm grateful to be doing some exploration with you today about the beautiful objects that are in the museum, including some things that aren't on regular display, which I hope you'll find interesting. I'm coming to you from my home in Wolseley on Treaty 1 territory, homeland of the Métis Nation. So I also quickly, before we get into today's topic, want to thank Inez Bonacosta, the fabulous collections registrar of the museum, and also new volunteer Lucy Christopher for some of the assistance they gave me with preparing today's presentation. So let's get started if we can. I am delighted to speak with you today about silhouettes, also known as shadow portraits. We're going to explore this topic today by looking at the history of this practice and also by looking at some work of contemporary artists. This will be a very visual talk. I'm going to be showing a lot of images, but I'm also going to try my best to describe what's on the screen so as to offer an audio mapping of visual content to increase the accessibility of this presentation. So right now I'm showing on screen, and I'll just let you kind of suck these back in and take pleasure in them. I'm showing three very representative examples of 19th century silhouette art. They are three profiles of women. They're all shown in profile, but some from the shoulders up only, and one of them from the waist up. In all cases, they are showing the outline of the body, of the face, of the hairdo or bonnet worn by a woman, and also in some cases details related to clothing. What we're seeing here are black outlines contrasted against very light backgrounds. And one of the silhouettes of the three that I'm showing has had some kind of fancy additions made to it using paint and ink. So we can see a kind of a red ribbon around the neck. A white collar has been added, as well as some outlining in gold on the hair and on the bodice of the figure. These are very simple forms of portraiture. They've been cut by hand from paper with scissors, and they've been made either by placing a hollowed cutout of light colored paper onto a black or dark background, or by placing a black shape onto a light background. And we'll get into that in more detail as we go along. I wanted to talk a little bit with you about how, like many other historical periods, the Victorians valued and put a lot of energy into studying the profile of the human face. So on screen now, I'm showing just some examples of the many examples in which profile mattered to visual culture in the 19th century. So I'm showing a gold coin, a sovereign, and also a penny black stamp, both showing the recognizable portrait of Queen Victoria. But I'm also showing a lovely piece of jet jewelry, a lovely engraving here of a woman's profile with her hair down. She's wearing a kind of a coat. We can see a kind of locket or brooch. And we are also seeing on screen right now a very beautiful shell cameo cut in shell. This is a ring we're looking at the surface of, and it shows in very fine detail, almost hair by hair, the details of a woman's appearance, including a beautiful lace collar. Now, these are expensive objects in the case of the jet and the shell cameo. They were made using a very fine set of skills, carving skills, and tools using expensive materials. Of course, I don't need to tell you that a gold sovereign was worth something. The penny black was only worth a penny, but it was mass circulated and moved, of course, through the society as the coin also would have, not really belonging to anyone so much as belonging to the society. But also on screen, we have a very beautiful hand-cut, simple, in paper only example of a silhouette. And it reminds us of the way in which this very affordable, accessible a form of portraiture could matter, not merely in terms of capturing, say, the profile of a queen or a very wealthy woman in the case of perhaps the jewelry we're viewing here, but a common woman, an everyday person. And so I'd like us to have that in mind today. I want to talk a little bit more about shadows with you, if I could, and about shadow portraits. So on screen right now, I have three 18th century paintings, and the 18th century really matters for silhouette because a lot of exciting things will happen in the 18th century, especially in France, involving silhouette. These three paintings, and I will give you an art history lesson here, partly because I'm not equipped to do so, but partly because we don't have time. But what we're seeing here is three artists all working in oil on canvas, and they're all bringing to life, reimagining a story from Pliny about how humans began the practice of portraiture, of creating portraits. So on screen right now, I have three very lovely young women in three different scenes. In each case, they are in close proximity to handsome young men, their lovers. The light has created a shadow of the lover's profile on the wall, and spontaneously, the woman who is anticipating the departure of her lover on a long journey has picked up a writing implement and is scratching or inking or penciling the outline right directly onto the wall. You can think of it as kind of graffiti of love here, involving the body of the lover. In all three cases, we are being asked to imagine shadow as playing an central role, an inspiring role, a role as catalyst in the creation of human portraits. This is, according to Pliny, how we begin the practice as humans in human culture of depicting one another. So, in the 18th century, we have this practice being imagined and depicted by painters using oils, but we also have a new kind of reality here. I am showing on the screen right now the interior of a silhouette artist's studio. And a very beautiful but very casually dressed woman is sitting on the chair. A light source is shining against her, and a piece of paper is being held by a male artist against the wall as he traces the outline of her profile, capturing it. We know that this is not accidental nor spontaneous because he has the paper against the wall, but also because other works by him are displayed against the wall, pinned up. Other people's profiles, also the profiles I would note of, I think, a dash hound maybe, and a donkey. And then there are also a group of small children in this picture making use of the same light source, a candle, a foiled candle, to create shadow puppets, kittens and bunnies on the wall. We can think of them as artists in training. So we have here this idea of using light to create and capture an image of the human face. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why we use the word silhouette to describe these kinds of images. And again, we are in 18th century France to have this encounter, this moment. Etienne de Silhouette is our person to thank and have in mind here. He was at a time of great financial duress for France, charged with the unenviable task of getting the finances of France in order as the Controller General. 1759, I'm afraid he didn't make it through a whole year, partly because he was terribly unpopular for taxing and otherwise making it difficult for the very wealthy of France at this particular moment. And so his name, Silhouette, was applied to what we can think of now as a highly affordable or austere, or to put it more negatively, cheap form of art. So if you consider, for example, the difference between having your portrait done in oils and what that would cost versus your portrait cut in paper and what that would cost, we get a sense of how the application of the term silhouette was linked with a very drastic form of economy. And so we thank him for that. So I wanted to think a little bit with you, if I could, about the why of silhouette art, about why people would have a silhouette made. And while this might be obvious to us, it's worth lingering on, I think. So silhouettes often portrayed loved ones, friends and family members. I'm showing on screen right now a very precious, beautifully framed image of a child's profile touched with gold ink or paint. It's in a frame small enough to hold in the hand. There's a thimble beside it to give us a sense of its scale. This is obviously a marker here, an expression of, a captured expression of, both an affection, a desire to remember this moment in a child's infancy, but it's also, of course, a marker of financial privilege, as this has been commissioned and created and framed very beautifully and either hung on the wall with a ribbon or perhaps even worn. On the right-hand side of the screen, though, I am showing Flora's profile, which is the title you can see inscribed on this piece just under the chin of the woman who's depicted here. This woman is known to us only as Flora, and she was an enslaved African-American woman who we know from the historical record and the bill of sale, which I also have on screen right now, was sold in 1796. And this silhouette might be a record of emotional attachment of somebody's love for her, but that is necessarily complicated by the very difficult reality and history of her existence as an enslaved person. And so it is important that we keep in mind here the breadth of experience that is engaged by the silhouette tradition, both the very privileged and the very disempowered. I do, though, want to show you this extraordinary and I think very energizing image of two women. It is a profile from the shoulders up, two silhouettes. The women face one another, their hair in buns, and a little bit of fringe on the front of their foreheads. This is Sylvia Drake and Charity Bryant, and we know that this paired silhouette was created in the early years of the 19th century, circa 1805. Their images are backed against cardboard, but also some lovely kind of faded out now pink silk. And the images are also very beautifully and delicately framed by a very thin braid of human hair, which has been made to form a heart between the two women at the lower portion of the framing. And I am delighted and excited to tell you that this was recently displayed in the United States. And curators, using family records of one of the women and some letters, especially left by a nephew, were able to assert quite compellingly that this is the first double portrait of a same-sex couple in the United States, the earliest portrait of same-sex lovers. So we have a great deal of history incorporated in the silhouette form. If you'll bear with me, I'd love to talk a little bit about makers, both amateur and professional makers of silhouettes. I'm actually going to read you a little bit, if you don't mind, from the Strand magazine from 1896. And many of you who are familiar with and supporters of Dalnavert will know 1895 is an important year, the year of the completion of the house and the family's first days in the house. 1896, perhaps a copy of the Strand magazine may have been found in the parlour of Dalnavert. It was widely read around the world, but this is what people were saying in 1896 about silhouette. The art of silhouetting has lately been revived. Many are now living who can remember this fashion at the time of their earlier days 40 or 50 years ago. Indeed, to some of the present generation, the idea of their grandfathers and grandmothers is inseparable from certain curious Black pictures, which in this irreverent age have found their lasting resting place upon the walls of the boot room or even the floor of the attic. This art was by no means confined to professionals nor to portraiture. In the early part of the present century, so the early 1800s, in the early part of the present century, the cutting out of figures from paper with scissors still formed one of the common evening diversions of young people, though the subjects chosen by the humble amateur did not often rise above the difficulties of still life, household furniture, chairs, tables, and so forth. Sometimes a performer of more than ordinary skill would attack domestic animals, carriages and horses, dancing figures, while one of higher aspirations still might attempt to represent a panoramic landscape. Now, the author of this lovely essay will go on to lament the fact that photography has really crushed down in the course of the 19th century the success of silhouette artists, as people were able to afford in the second half of the 19th century, were able to afford a photographic portrait rather than simply a hand-cut paper silhouette. So we should have that in mind. I am showing on screen two scenes of silhouette making. One, a little boy in a sailor suit is tracing a little girl's profile created by shadow against the wall onto a sheet of paper. And then a more elaborate, idealized, and perhaps erotically charged image in which two women and a man are present in a lavishly decorated room, Regency room, and the man is staring intently at a woman as he cuts out her silhouette in black card. I want you to think about how everyday people were making and cherishing silhouettes. And I'm showing on screen now a beautiful example from the Museum of London's extensive collection of handmade valentines. And we see paper cut professionally, machine cut paper, like a doily, very elaborate oval shaped cuttings. We also see professionally made, mass-produced ornamentation in the form of cut-out colored flowers. Perhaps they were part of another card or another form of printed material, and they've been cut out and put on. But in the middle of the front of this Valentine's card is a very simple outline of a child, again suggesting here how paper arts, such as cut silhouette, could express emotion and emotional attachment. But I need you to know that some so-called amateur makers were very, very skilled, and some of them were also very, very well-positioned in society. So I'm showing on screen a portrait of Princess Elizabeth. She was the daughter of George III, and some examples of her work. And again, I refer to the Strand magazine, who delights in telling us that Princess Elizabeth, daughter of George III, was also a famous scissor woman, and I love that phrase, cutting many profiles, also trees, birds, cupids, and cupid groups. And it's true, when you look through her work, there are many fat little cupids running around. Trees, birds, and flowers, however, are the rarest motifs of this art, as being the most difficult to cut and far less familiar to the average observer. And Princess Elizabeth was celebrated for her work, both with the human figure and landscape. But of course, there were professionals, people who made a living by creating silhouette pieces. On screen, I have an example of the interior of a silhouette artist's studio. Two men, one cutting a silhouette. This is an anonymous American 19th century piece that uses both ink and cut paper. And I'll describe it as best I can. A man is standing, top hat on, cane in hand, and he's standing as another man with scissors in hand and a sheet of paper cuts freehand his silhouette. And between the two men, behind them on the wall, are some examples of a rather diverse group of sitters, large men, tall men, short men, round men, thin men, all of whom are there, of course, to attract clients and demonstrate the skill of the silhouette artist in his studio. I'm now showing a quite lovely oil painting from 1798, and we are again in the interior of a silhouette artist's studio. And we find an artist touching up with some gold paint, some details on a silhouette. What's quite interesting here, I think, is how we kind of feel a tension here between different art forms, as the painter in oil is able to give us a very, very detailed depiction of a lovely boy. Perhaps he's 8, 9, 10. He's wearing a rather elaborate lilac suit with lots of buttons on it, a big kind of bow tie, some rather precious little shoes. He has red apple cheeks, and his hair is very tidily brushed. And so what we have here is an oil painter showing us in color, in detail, the clothing, the appearance of the boy. And that is being contrasted with a very simple black silhouette that we see over the shoulder of the artist who's created it. So we can kind of get a sense here of different kinds of portraiture, referencing one another, arguably in competition with one another. But How could we get this done efficiently and quickly? How could a person make a very good living making silhouette art? Well, one thing they could do is use a very clever and convenient machine of the kind I'm showing on screen right now. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. We have here a seated woman holding herself very still. She's in front of a screen. A candle projects her shadow profile against that screen. And behind the screen, an operator is tracing her outline as projected by the candle onto a piece of paper. And I think one can imagine client after client, subject after subject, sitting in this chair to have their silhouette made efficiently and accurately, traced on paper, then cut out and framed. But what about scale? And how can we make a copy of the shadow, the silhouette of a human face that is smaller than the face itself? Very complicated things can be done with light, but one could also have great success with a machine like the one I'm showing now, which belongs to the George Eastman Museum, and I really recommend their site to you. They have some wonderful offerings. At the George Eastman Museum, were we to visit, we might be so lucky as to have a chance to have our silhouette made with this very, very clever device. It was invented by British inventor John Hawkins, and in the late 18th century and early 19th century, it was popularized. And here's how it works. An operator is tracing, but please note, not drawing, just tracing the shadow created by candlelight of a profile, of a human profile on paper. And then above him, above that tracing space, is an armature. And that armature follows his movements, mimicking his movements, drawing a scaled down version, this time using pencil on paper, leaving a mark, a scaled down version of that profile. Once everything is traced, one could take the paper that's being pinned against the board off. One could put 3 or 4 more pieces of paper behind it and cut multiple copies of that image at the same time. So it's being scaled down. It is being perhaps produced in more than one image at a time at a great rate. And we have here efficiency and accuracy both achieved. For me, this is fascinating, but for collectors, this also has particular interest. I'm showing Charles Willson Peale, who was, as you can see, this is a self-portrait, a wonderfully gifted painter. He's an American painter working in Philadelphia, but Charles Willson Peale is also a collector of all sorts of oddities and curiosities, as well as the operator of a museum, of Peale's Museum in Philadelphia. And what Peale was very quick to realize was the power of this machine, the physiognotrace or physionotrace. And he acquired one and he had it up in operation in his museum in Philadelphia in 1802. And thousands of museum visitors, I'm suddenly struck by how cool it would be if Dalnavert had one of these. But in any case, thousands of visitors to the museum left with a souvenir, their own silhouette portrait. And I wanted just to tell you a little bit about that. So these are now these Peale Museum silhouettes, highly collectible pieces that they're also interestingly frequently forged. So don't rush out on eBay and purchase one. Some of you may be able to see a faint impression, a stamp under the gentleman's collar in the silhouette on the right that says museum. And this is one of the ways in which connoisseurs of the silhouette are able to assess whether or not they're dealing with a real Peale portrait or with a forgery. Another way to do it is to pull the whole thing apart. I'm showing right now a deconstructed example of a hollow cut silhouette. And I'm doing this in the hope it will give you a sense of the different ways that we can make a silhouette. We can either take a piece of black paper or card and cut out a shape. Or we can take a light colored surface, as has been the case with the Peale Museum hollow cut silhouette, and we can make a hollow, an empty space, And that is then placed on, in this case, black fabric to create the contrast and then framed. So I hope this gives you a sense of how this is made. If this isn't making sense still, you could think of this kind of as, I don't know, a donut versus a timbit. The donut is the outside frame and then something has been popped out of the middle. I'm saying that and realizing I have no idea how either donut or a timbit are made, but we'll move on from there. I wanted to let you know that one very clever, at least one very clever professional silhouette artist, William Bach, kept all of the cutouts and sold to his customers the outline. And he kept all of those cutouts as a record of his work in a really stunning ledger book from the early 1800s. And I think are we looking at 30 portraits here, 60 portraits here. We're looking at 60 profiles. And I can let you know, if you're following along with me, that they show a great variety of individuals as indicated by their body shapes, by their hairstyles, by their hats. So we have here a really significant diversity, age, gender, ethnicity, the whole thing here. So we get a strong sense that many, many people cared about their silhouettes, sought them out, and paid makers like Bach to have an object like this in their lives. I wanted to tell you though, if you don't mind, about a very celebrated maker in this field, and that's Auguste Edouard. And Auguste Edouard's work is also highly sought after. I'm showing a self-portrait. He was born in France, but was active in the UK and also in the USA. And we are fortunate to have not only some lovely examples of his work still surviving, but we also have some advertisements from newspapers. I'll just read a little bit of an advertisement I'm showing on screen now. It says, "Likenesses in profile executed by Monsieur Edouard, who begs to observe that his likenesses are produced by the scissors alone and are preferable to any taken by machines, inasmuch as by the above method, the expression of the passions and peculiarities of character are brought into action in a style which has not hitherto been attempted by any other artist." So he ran this in a British newspaper, and he was clearly competing with these machine-made silhouettes, which very accurate, lack, he suggests here, the artistry and the capacity for representation of his work, which is done simply with a piece of paper and a pair of scissors in hand. So if you're curious, a full length silhouette would set you back 5 shillings. Children under 8 years old were interestingly more, I presume because they wiggled around. They were 5 shillings 6 pence. And he would you to know that any additional cutting, such as an instrument or a table, would have to be paid for at an extra fee. I think, though, we can see the value of one of these investments by observing some of his work. I'm showing 3 portraits of children by Auguste Edouard right now, a girl skipping, a girl speaking with it, or perhaps a boy with a doll, and then a young boy with a lovely little dog begging very diligently at his feet. These are works of art and immensely engaging. Sometimes he portrayed very famous people, such as Thomas Sully, a portrait artist who is shown with his easel. I assume that cost Sully extra money to have that done. Sully often worked in the US, but he actually came to Britain to take Queen Victoria's portrait. And then I'm also showing you a lovely image of Sarah Hale, who is seated, kind of a carpet around her, and she's holding some letters, which she's reading. Sarah Hale was a very prominent woman journalist. She was the editor of Godey's Ladies' Book, a widely read publication for and by women in the 19th century in the United States. On screen now, I have 2 more examples of Edouard's extraordinary work in silhouette. They are both African-American musicians, Francis Frank Johnson and his successor, Joseph Anderson, shown with their musical instruments. And also to remind ourselves of the diversity of subjects captured by silhouette, I'm sharing an image of Laura Bridgman, who was a kind of a celebrity figure of education in the 19th century, a deaf, blind woman whose literacy and ability to sign fascinated the non-disabled world. Laura Bridgman is shown. I think she's either knitting, crocheting, mending. And then also I have an image here also by Edouard of a woman named Dalmany. Unfortunately, we do not know her name beyond that, and she's named after the man who enslaved her, Mr. Delma, and he was with her in New Orleans in 1844 and commissioned a portrait from Edouard, and she's either holding a bonnet or a basket, I'm not sure, in her left hand. Some of the images that Edouard made and sold to people show family groups or groups of friends. And I have 3 women, a child, and a man on screen right now, all of them kind of holding an object, a hat, a doll, a letter, a book. But I wanted to linger with you, if you don't mind, on a piece called The Magic Lantern, created by Edouard, which shows us kind of the extraordinary nature of his work. And I'll do my best to describe it. It shows a very privileged family, very well dressed, in a large room, well carpeted and well draped. They're watching a magic lantern presentation in their home, and there's even a dog who seems extremely excited. The scene shows a kind of Western scene, a man escaping on a horse, it looks like from police. So perhaps that accounts for the excitement we're seeing. We can see that beyond the family group, the privileged family group, there are other people being shown here. A servant, likely an enslaved person, is peeking through the door to enjoy the show. We also have the magic lantern operator in the middle of the scene, who is creating this extraordinary visual experience for the family. And then close at the front of the image at the bottom left is the musician, the kind of player who is creating the musical accompaniment for the Magic Lantern show. And his wooden leg is very clearly depicted in this scene. So again, Edouard offers both images here of privilege, but also of diversity, as he includes more marginalized figures, people with disabilities and people living in enslavement. So now for something completely different, if I may. I thought we should just quickly visit some beautiful homes because we are being brought together here by a beautiful home, Dalnavert. I wanted to show you this extraordinary National Trust property in Exmouth, Devon, UK, and perhaps somebody with us today has been so fortunate as to visit this extraordinary house museum. I will just give a tip of my hat to it. It's an 18th century home. It's a 16-sided house with 20 rooms. It's managed by the National Trust, but it was built by 2 women who did not marry, a Miss Jane Parmenter and her cousin and ward Mary Parmenter, and then they decorated it like crazy after having gone on a wonderful women-only grand tour of Europe and coming back with many wonderful ideas. Now, why am I picking this beautiful house? Well, it is one example of many of how silhouette mattered to the decoration of the 19th century home. Perhaps you can see, and maybe I'll zoom in there, how many silhouettes crowd the space of this home. We see them lined up, interspersed interestingly with photographs above a fireplace, for example. We see lovely scenes of kind of 18th century life. A woman with a parasol, for example, is depicted in a solo piece, but others show a garden scene with many bells and bows sharing the garden space together. A fireplace from elsewhere in the house also features 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, many beautiful silhouettes, paired in some cases with the depiction of portraits in oil. I wanted to show you a beautiful pairing of positive and negative reliefs of Mary Will-Ron, which is in the drawing room at Alleronde. And what we have here is we have the 2 pieces of paper, the part that was cut out and the part that was left over, both framed of the same woman facing in different directions, showing us, of course, the beautiful capacity of this form. I'm going to quickly make reference for people who are able to enjoy the screen here to a set of paintings by an American painter, John Lewis Louis Krimmel, who seems unable to paint a scene of village life without including at least two silhouettes always over the fireplace, always facing one another. So there's a fireplace, beautifully depicted humans, also a noteworthy portrait of two dogs, and then two tiny silhouettes referenced in this painting of an interior. An interior, this time featuring a country wedding, a crying mother, celebrating family members, a shy new bride, two doves in a cage above the newlyweds, and two silhouette portraits above the fireplace. Krimmel couldn't help himself. The quilting frolic showing a party of people who've come together to make a quilt. And again, above the fireplace, we will see two silhouettes facing one another. I wanted to show you, moving forward in history to 1838 and moving back to the United Kingdom, some beautiful work by Mary Ellen Best, who is a beautiful amateur artist in watercolor who did very detailed depictions of her own home and the homes of her friends. And we're seeing in a painting here, Mrs. Duffman in her dining room. Again, portraits in oil, very expensive, beautifully framed, but above the sideboard, down below, on a very different scale, a little silhouette lingers in this otherwise very expensive and beautiful grouping of works of art in the domestic space. And even very, very well-known cultural critics and commentators like these two people, Thomas and Jane Carlisle in their beautiful home in Chelsea. This is a painting, Chelsea interior. They're shown with, again, pet birds in the background, their loyal dog on the couch. They're in a beautifully decorated mid-19th century London home, but right at the back, we see a silhouette linger in this space. So silhouettes as important in the decorative world of the particularly privileged 19th century home. And I just wanted to show this much later painting in which the fireplace double silhouette image has been replaced by a couch, and we have a settee against the wall, and again, two silhouettes face each other on either side of a lamp. We have been lingering in the homes of the past, but I want us to be aware that many contemporary artists continue to be very thoroughly fascinated by silhouette. On screen, I'm showing Christy Malakoff. She's a Canadian artist's full-size installation of a group of children cut from black cardboard dancing around a maypole in a massive room-sized installation. Again, she's using that silhouette form, black paper, to explore a cultural experience in a very visually stunning way. I'm now showing the more challenging and difficult work of Kara Walker, an American artist, and this is a piece whose full title is available on screen from 1997 called Slavery, Slavery. And Kara Walker has used large room-size installations of black silhouettes on white backgrounds to explore racial violence specific to experiences of slavery, including sexual violence, and creates very, very challenging and difficult installations and very, very powerful ones. I wanted to tell you just quickly about Kumihimoshita, who is a very gifted Japanese artist who is also interested in how we cast shadows to make art. And what she does is she takes, for example, shapes such as letters or numbers or just wooden blocks. She installs them against walls in such a way that a light source will create a beautiful, compelling shape of a human body, as though a human was standing in that same light source's spectrum. We have here a face of a child made out of numbers, a face of a woman made out of letters, again, using shadow to create something that does not actually exist. She's not making a profile out of a human face, she's making a human profile out of other materials. If you're curious about how this is done, we have a wall with shapes. This is a children's building block set. The building blocks have been stuck against the wall in such a configuration that she makes the bold, fine outline in large scale, perhaps 3 feet or 4 feet in length against a wall, a single light source, creating the directionality needed for this achievement. Yamashita is very interesting though for her work with paper. So we've been looking at profiles cut out of paper. Yamashita has created a practice in which she takes a single sheet of origami paper and makes no cuts whatsoever, but simply makes some kind of ruffling folds. And by making those ruffling folds is able to create many, many versions of the human face. And this is a piece called Origami from 2011. So again, this idea of shadow of silhouette, of profile of paper. I wanted to very quickly show you the work of Cheryl Rock before we leave contemporary artists behind, because amazing work is being done by living artists in Canada right now. Cheryl Rock is an African-Canadian artist who uses black paper to make large-scale images that celebrate the stories of the African diaspora, and also to celebrate the beauty, the resiliency, the power of Black women. And I'll show a few examples of her work. Women shown in profile, multiple women in grouping, often using profiles that involve foliage, leaves in particular, sometimes flowers, to show very bold, powerful, inspiring outlines. And Cheryl Rock is also a contemporary Canadian artist. By the way, she's probably the only artist any of us could afford to buy work from that I've shown today. Her work is very affordable and she makes small scale pieces and she sells on Instagram if you're interested. But she also makes very powerful pieces, for example, pieces that acknowledge important social issues such as the murder of George Floyd, or for May 5th, recognition of murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls. Okay, here we go to the star of the show, and this is the kind of the last thing that I wanted to share with you. I wanted to share with you some amazing things from the collection at Dalnavert Museum, and these are things that I was fortunate that Inez Bonacosta, our collections registrar, and new volunteer Lucy Christopher were able to discover, along with the help of museum staff members, thanks to them also lingering in the attic. What we have in front of us is a beautifully framed, in matching frames pair, a gent and a woman positioned so as to see each other. And if you are able to look very closely at the bottom of the woman's profile, you can see the cut line through to where this silhouette was kind of cut, where the scissors began the work of cutting. So here's another lovely pairing, again, matching frames, not large pieces, showing silhouettes, a young gentleman and a young woman. And things get interesting when we turn them over. I don't need to tell curators anything along those lines. Sometimes the most interesting things are at the bottom of the teacup or under the vase or the back of the frame. What we do when we look at these beautiful silhouettes from Dalnavert's collection is we discover that they were made by the Foster brothers of Boston. And we also find on these beautifully sealed frames some information. Silhouette number 51, a young bow, published by Foster Brothers Boston. What's going on here? Well, they've certainly given us lots of clues to work with. Who were the Foster brothers? Well, they were very successful frame makers. They made gorgeous frames. They decided that perhaps they could sell more frames by putting gorgeous things inside of them. And so they started to reproduce watercolors and, you guessed it, silhouettes. So we have here in some of their advertisements, one of their claims: silhouettes, delightful additions to any decorative scheme based on the sophisticated charm of other days. And they're doing this right around 1897, 1898. They're going to start to sell you not the chance to have your silhouette made, not a silhouette of your dearly beloved, a child or a grandparent. They're going to sell you a silhouette of a complete stranger to hang up in your house because it looks great. And so that's what we have going on. By the way, they made a killing, apparently, selling George Washington and Martha Washington's profiles. Very much collected. People enjoyed having those in their homes. So we weren't even pretending they were relatives in some cases. But here we go. If we take our lovely images from Dalnavert's collection and we put them right against the advertisement from the early 20th century, we can see here that we have a set from the Foster Brothers catalog from their line. And we too have, of course, sophisticated charm of other days available to us. Dalnavert, always in style, of course. I'm just going to close off with some final words. Silhouettes are fitting mementos of our shadow existence. And I take those words from the lovely The Strand essay that we've been referencing. I'm also going to finish off, if you don't mind, with 2 shameless pieces of self-promotion. Please kindly consider marking your calendar for Friday, December 10th at noon Winnipeg time. So please mark your calendars. Oh, do I have the wrong time? Yes, I do have the wrong time. I'll work out the right time and I'll let you know momentarily, but please mark your calendars for Friday, December 10th. That would be 1 to 2 p.m. Pacific time. I'll have to translate that to, of course, 3 p.m. Winnipeg time, 3 p.m. Winnipeg time, when Dalnavert's very own Charlene Van Buchenhout will be joining me online for a conversation about her extraordinary work as a moving panorama artist and performer. It's a free event and everyone's welcome, and I hope you consider coming. It's going to be an hour-long interview and I'm very excited. And also shamelessly, may I invite you to, on these cold days to come, listen to some of the voices of Dalnavert, including Inez Bonacasa and former intern curator Kyle McPhail, who are featured in Victorian Samplings, a podcast which I am thrilled to co-host with some other very excited and skilled and curious individuals curious about the 19th century and the beautiful things people made. And if you would like to listen to Victorian Samplings, you can do so with your laptop, your tablet, or your smartphone by going to craftingcommunities.net. And if you would like to listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, those are great options too. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you found something to be engaged by visually here or historically here. And thank you again to the staff of Dalnavert Museum and Visitor Center for this chance to chat with you today.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was so interesting. It was so interesting. I have lots of questions and comments, and I just want to say to everyone that about the podcast. So I personally binged all of it a while ago, and you may think, oh, I don't know if I'm that interested in crafting, but you are. You definitely are. You will find it was all interesting, all of it, every single.
Thank you, Charlene. That means a lot. I'm glad to hear that because we would like you to be a guest coming up, but we'll talk about that more another time. Thanks, Charlene.
Sure. I have worked with scissors and silhouette creating to do shadow puppetry. Actually, it's very difficult, and I just wanted to comment that looking at the detail that some of the artists are working with, some of the ones from the 18th, 19th century, and then also contemporary, the detail we're getting are like eyelashes. It's just so incredible to see that kind of you have to use tiny scissors and you have to use those little cutters and you need a table. It's just incredible. So it was really interesting to bring up, and a lot of those contemporary artists too. Great to see. Bring back the silhouette as an activity. That's a fun thing to do.
Well, Charlene, can I jump in on that? Because if you feel inspired to make your own silhouette or your cat silhouette or, a loved one's silhouette or a potted plant's silhouette, whatever you've got going on, there are great tutorials online on YouTube that you can look up. And a lot of them actually involve your smartphone. So you take a picture on your smartphone, you lay your tissue paper over top, you trace it, you're good to go. It's already scaled down for you. If you're a tablet user, that's also a possibility. So there's some really great examples of how to make your own silhouette available online. And I've been fortunate to play around with them a little bit myself. So yes, that's a good cheat, Charlie, and I'll put it that way.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's great. Great tips. So if anybody, we have a few minutes here. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'll just read some of the comments coming out. Jennifer Jansen says, I'm going to attempt to try my hand at doing a portrait of my dog, Peanut. That's so cute. Calla says, thank you for an amazing presentation. Love seeing historical and contemporary artists work in this fascinating media. Yeah, totally fascinating. Any questions at all for Vanessa at this time?
I'll jump in, Charlene, if I could. Does
Yeah.
anyone have a silhouette? Has anyone gone? I know that many kind of historical cities like St. Augustine in Florida is a place I visited where they were cutting them very reasonable, something like $17. I'm wondering if anyone has a silhouette. I'm fortunate to have silhouettes of both of my daughters, but anyone? Oh, by the way, that's another option, Charlene. If you sought a silhouette, you can send your photo to a silhouette artist. They'll make a video of themselves cutting it online while you're watching, and they'll send you the video and your silhouette through the mail. Just saying, people are very clever. So,
wow, that is so cool.
Okay, Jennifer Jansen has one by her aunt. So it may be an artist, but maybe an amateur maker. That's wonderful. And I will just say, I think Peanut will look lovely in profile.
I was just going to say that it's so funny to know that the Foster brothers were selling frames with other photos, because like that, when you get a photo, a frame nowadays, you get that family inside there, and it's just like not taking that family out of there, just having that pretend fake family in there and leaving it in there.
Totally, because they look good. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's so funny. Great. People are just saying thank you so much, and yes. So if nobody else has any questions or comments, this is being recorded, so if you need to see it again, it'll be available. Oh, Kristen Hardy says, perhaps the most common use of this technique today is carving jack-o'-lanterns.
It's a great point. Fabulous. Yes. Yes. Which is hard in its own way. Yes. So
yeah. That's harder to do, I think, than using a paper, but I don't know. I don't often do it because it seems like it's too hard. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a little bit cooler outside, so it's nice to be cozy, warm in our own spaces, and listening to this and looking at these fabulous photos and learning about all the history is just incredible. Thank you so much, Vanessa, and thank you all for joining us. And the museum is open, so you can come Wednesday through Sunday and visit us. And we have lots of Christmas programming up, so just take a look at the website for all the events, because there's lots coming up for you to come and enjoy the house and maybe see those silhouettes in person. And thank you so much. Thanks for the